Social credit, it's in the news. It's one of the biggest news in China right now. It's in Le Monde, which called it dystopique, and compared it with Black Mirror, it has more than 1,700,000 hits in Google. The New York Times called it potentially Orwellian, which is a really good way of putting it, actually. And well, it was mentioned today also a few times. A lot of people know about that. Every time I meet someone new and I mention that I live in China, the first thing they ask is, oh, what about social credit? And you're going to blame them because it's been on the news all the time for many years. And one of perhaps the most funny or interesting reports about social credit was this piece of news in Wired. And what they're saying here is that, so a Chinese girl, I guess, in Los Angeles was walking to work, which is something that people in Los Angeles never do. And the guy asked her why, and she said that she needed the steps. She needed to walk to work because her phone was being monitored by the Chinese government, and if she didn't walk to work, they could prevent her from working or traveling abroad. So is this true? No, this is not true. This is absolutely fake. It's really funny. I have to commend the guy's imagination, but this is not what is happening right now in China. So what is the social credit system? Nobody knows. That's actually how it works. And nobody knows in China. That's the way that the Chinese government wants it. When the Chinese government does a new thing, they don't issue an order with details on how to do it. They issue a document with their wishes. And the Chinese government said, well, we want a social credit system. It didn't say anything else. So every single local government department is supposed to do something about it. And then the central government will assess their efforts and maybe promote them or maybe not promote them. But nobody in China right now knows what to do. And if you ask anyone in China what the social credit system is, nobody knows. Absolutely nobody. More people in Europe know about this than people in China. But it is a real thing. I mean, there's plenty of government documents about it. And so the thing is, China has no credit score system. The government doesn't know who owes money and who doesn't. And a lot of people in China have been taking a lot of money in debt and they're not paying them back. Supposedly some tens of millions of people in China. And a lot of people are selling fake goods, they're selling toxic food, they're doing all sorts of scams, and when the thing busts, they just run away and there's no way to catch them. And everybody knows this in China, so nobody trusts anyone. And if somebody of you have made business in China, you most likely know what it is to work with people who just don't fulfill the contracts and just run away. So this is the background for the Chinese government starting the social trust system. And there's a few pictures of what the Chinese see of the system. So there's this guy which says 水信者, which means a guy who has failed to fulfill his duties, a guy without trust, and the government is just putting a net over the guy so he cannot move away. Again, a guy who owes money, has money in his hand, and he wants to run away, but every step of the way there's a hand saying limits, and the guy has to go through the only way possible, which is fulfill your duty. This is how Chinese ways see it. When you explain it to them that way, everybody likes the system. So, as I said before, local governments are just trying different things to see how it works, and nobody has any actual orders of what to do. So when they hear that the government wants a social credit system, what they do is blacklist. So, for example, in the Chinese trains, there were people who were just sitting in a seat which wasn't theirs, and they wouldn't move when the person with the seat assigned was going there, and they would just start a tantrum and fight and just shout that way, and there was no way to do it because police wouldn't go, the train is moving. So the Chinese rail system, inspired by the social credit order from the government, made a blacklist. The people who behave badly, they cannot go in the train. And the most famous part of the social credit initiative is the court system. The court system have a blacklist of people who have failed to pay the debt. And what they do to them is they don't send them to prison. They send them an order where they cannot engage in high-grade consumption. They cannot buy luxury goods. They cannot get on an airplane. They cannot get on a high-speed train. They can get on a slow train. They can get on a bus. but they cannot spend money, basically. Because a lot of people in China have a lot of money, have a lot of debt, and they have a Ferrari, and they have their kids in private school, and they go into Bali and put it on Instagram, and people hate that. So the government are forcing them to save money and to pay. And again, most people agree with this. Think is a very smart of dealing with this problem. Again, this was also in the press and has been really misunderstood. But also about a dozen towns in China, small towns, have started pilot programs where they put points to every single resident. They give them points, and they add or remove points according to behavior. So yeah, if you have some traffic infraction, they take points out of you. Or if you do a public protest, which is banned in China, obviously, you get points less. And if your neighbor complains about you, it goes on your credit system, and you lose points. On the other way around, if you're nice and do things that the government wants you to do, you gain points. Right now, this system doesn't really work because local governments don't have the power to reward anything. Supposedly, they give some rice or some pickles or some metal to the people who behave well, but the only teeth that the system has right now is public servants who are promoted or not promoted according to the social credit in those towns, and that does actually work. Again, the line between private companies and public departments in China is a bit thin. Everybody is, the party leads everything, as they like to say there. So private companies also heard the order of the government and were trying to do something like it. And Alibaba, which is the kind of the Amazon of China, is a huge company which sells a lot of stuff. And they also have a payment system, which is bigger than credit cards right now in China. They set a system called Sesame Credit. Alibaba Sesame, yeah, there's a pun there. And if you have a high score, you have lower interest rates when you borrow money from them because they're also a bank. And if you have to rent a car or rent a bicycle, you don't have to put a deposit because you have a high score. They know you have money. And the other way around, if you have a low score, you have to pay more when you borrow money, the same as a normal credit score in the West. Also, this is funny but not really consequential, but some dating sites were using or asking for the Sesame credit score just to put it there to know if you're rich, because girls in China are interested in that. And it was also put in the Western press in a very sensational way. This is how the system works. I have this, everybody in China has this. It's a score, it's some points. And in the right, you can see the polygon, and there's the 5 criteria they use to assess your score. One of the scary things about this system is that they calculate the score of your friends. So if you have rich friends, you get a high score. And that is pretty scary. But still, this is a private company doing what is, in essence, a point system. So it's more like, they want you to share the system with their friends so more people sign up. It is nothing political. And that is what it is right now. But as the New York Times was saying, it is potentially Orwellian, and it really is. Right now, and so Alibaba has all this data on whatever you buy, wherever you are, because they have your phone data. What do you like, what do you don't like, who your friends are. The companies know that, the government also knows that, because the government has all the data of every single internet company in China. China also has 200 million cameras across all the country. They have no blind spots, they see everything. And they also have facial recognition to know who is where. There was a news 2 weeks ago, they have developed a way of identifying people by how they walk. So even if you're walking with your back to the camera, they still know who you are. Now, if you join all the data from the internet companies and what the police have on you, then you have the panopticon, the famous Foucault idea that nobody took seriously, but it's been a while, now it seems it's going to happen. That is pretty much how it is in every single post in China. They have cameras everywhere. There's also a really interesting angle to the social credit system that, well, Xi Jinping actually, there was a paper a month ago. Xi Jinping got his job for other reasons, but also because he's a famous theorist of cybernetics. He's a chemical engineer, he has some papers on complex systems engineering, and most Chinese statesmen are engineers. Politicians in the West tend to be lawyers, and lawyers like the law. They like the courts, they like to make law, they like to talk about that. But politicians in China are mostly engineers. They don't like the courts. They try to avoid just lawyerly stuff. Also because lawyers in China tend to be of a more Western orientation. And there's been some political troubles about that too. So in a way, you can say that the social credit system is a way of modifying behavior before suing people, before arresting people, before using the courts. So you can avoid all that. There's also an economic ingredient to this. And if we have any economists in the room, they will know that socialism was said to fail because there's this socialist calculation problem, that central planned communist economies just couldn't work because they didn't have enough data to calculate proper prices. Well, the Chinese now seem to think that they now have the data because there's a lot of data now. Now we have computers, we have broadband, we have internet, we have smartphones, we know everything, or they know everything. So maybe they can now start again with doing more socialist economics 40 years after opening up. And again, this is not just China. In the US, there's also this, it was also mentioned today, but a speaker, there's this nudge theory and a new current in economics called behavioral economics, where they're trying to modify behavior using regulation before using the typical punishments of the courts of law. And this has been extensively talked about in the US, and also the US IT companies, they have all the data in the world. Facebook knows everything about you. Google knows everything about you. Even if you turn your phone, Google is actually tracking your GPS, and that was proved last year. This guy knows something about this, you guys may remember. All data that US companies have on you is also accessible by the US government, by the NSA, by the FBI. There was a really interesting article also last year about Marriott hotels. Hotels in the US also have a law which is not very well known, that they share every single information they have on their clients, including the rooms they are, where they're going, the faces, if they go to the bar or not. All that goes to the FBI. And the FBI has a huge database with all the data of people who stay in their hotels. And the same way that China is doing facial recognition and AI, using AI algorithms to analyze the people, well, the US has those too. A big Google executive called Kai-Fu Lee wrote a book last year saying that the world, this is not about nuclear weapons now. The world only has two superpowers, which is the US and China, because they have AI and nobody else does. So in 10, 20 years' time, the world will be two camps, one dominated by China and the other dominated by the United States. And to end the talk, so what should Europe do? We don't have Google, we don't have Facebook, we also don't have Alibaba. Europe doesn't have any huge companies which know everything about us. And maybe that's a good thing. And I think the EU knows that. So Europe hasn't, some people are trying to develop AI, but there's also another current which is, let us stop the others from having our data. And the European data laws like GDPR are the strongest in the world. And that's maybe a good thing. Maybe by not having all these huge companies which know everything about us, we end up being the only people in the world which are not controlled by our government.